Like Dr. Weber, if you could perhaps, respond to some of the comments we've heard, particularly the very interesting proposals from Professor Weber de Mauro, I think that might be a great way to close.
You still have your Greek bias. If we just have 5 minutes, let me just try and at least pay some tribute to most of the comments. So starting in a reverse order with Daniel, I think I absolutely agree. What you need is a European capital market culture. We don't have that yet. Investors are too much fixed income focused and debt instrument focused, not equity focused, and that needs to change. But if you look how that change can be brought about, it can only be brought about by dealing broadly with reforms, and Andre mentioned that in the pension system, in moving to a capital market-based pillar of the pension system and moving away from governments playing the key role in the pension system. And there, I think Europe can learn from capital markets like in the US. If you talk to a US employee whose pension is to a large extent invested in corporate equity and debt instruments, they're much more financially literate on average about capital market developments and interested in that than in Europe. That needs to be brought about. But in order to do that, you still need all things to fall in place at the same time. You need to change the culture, you need to have the institutions that can provide capital market access, and you need a performance track record for those investors to really go and invest in certain funds. And that's where I think the global banks can play a role, because we can provide all of that. We can provide the investment opportunities, we can provide the track records, and we can help build a private capital market that basically supplements the pay-as-you-go. Actually, a lot of the European debt problems are like a iceberg. You have the, and Beatrice, was talking about a debt restructuring. In Germany, for example, 270% of GDP is the number you get when you look at unfunded liabilities if you just add the implicit promises made through pension systems over the next 50 years and what goes into the financing of that. And I very much fear that the recommendation, I will be very short, of doing a haircut on existing debt is like chopping up the top of the iceberg. We all know what happens. The rest of the iceberg comes further up. And I think you don't really solve the problem that way. I think it would actually be quite dangerous, because you talked about a one-off cut in debt. We all know in economics, in game theory, once you do a one-off, how do you prevent it becomes a repeated game? And I think if you were to do another, again, you said Greece did it again. Greece already did a haircut. If you continue to do haircuts on investors, this is open heart surgery for financial markets, because how can you make sure that financial markets will ever believe you again and you don't produce a European Argentina where financial markets retreat? And actually be mindful of whom you're haircutting. The financial markets after the first round is largely out of Greek debt. You're haircutting the ECB, you're haircutting the European institutions, you're haircutting the IMF. Now, if you exclude the IMF and the ECB, because that would immediately put a roadblock in front of the QE program that Andre loves so much, I think it would prevent a lot of things happening in Europe that many have. So I think there are many downsides to such recommendation. Unfortunately, time is too short to go into it.
If we could take a minute, Professor would like to clarify perhaps some of her remarks and maybe just tie it into what you were just saying.
Yeah, I think it's important, also because of the applause I got. I think it's important to clarify that this is not a proposal for Greece. It's not a proposal for haircutting Greece, certainly not at this stage. And the idea is, Greece, as you said, has already had a restructuring, is mainly official debt now, and will have to be dealt with in a different way. The question is, what happens with the rest of the Eurozone? And that is our concern there. And the proposal is mainly, is not about haircutting mainly. Some private sector participation could be part of it, but there are ways how within the public sector you can restructure that through buybacks that reduces now the nominal debt and brings you into a better equilibrium. So just to clarify this, and the full report will be out soon. So I just don't want to leave it with a misunderstanding
I'd be looking forward to reading the full report. But the other thing really that I'm concerned about when people talk about the private sector, who is the private sector? The private sector as a pension fund and as an insurance company has clients. They invest clients' money. You have to look through. The game and the haircut doesn't end with pension funds and with the insurance companies. It ends with the ultimate investor. The ultimate investor is mom and pop, as they call it in the United States. It's Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Jones, Meyer, and whatever they're called. And so if you haircut pension funds, that will be passed on to the ultimate investors and the people behind these institutions. So you end up in a game that is left pocket, right pocket for the citizens of Europe, because if you haircut pension funds and investors, you actually have a big impact on their clients. But I'm looking forward to the study, and I'll be happy to read it. Just maybe a last word on Fabrizio and what I think it's absolutely important you move on a trade/services/financial services agreement with as many partners as you do. You hadn't mentioned Switzerland. I would encourage you to include that next time in the list. And we are very much looking forward to a financial sector service agreement, because the other one will take a long time and we need it quick. So I think that's the one. And Fabrizio, and I think the other common theme that I really appreciate, and it's important, there is a big concern with the citizens of Europe about financial cross-border flows, because it is very often perceived as hot money that is there when you don't need it and it will not be there when you need it most. I think that's not what we're talking about. We're really talking about long-term, investment-oriented support in financial markets. And actually, I think one of the downsides, and I'd like to end with that, of the new regulation is in the calibration of the risk weights and the penalty for ultimate investors, banks and insurance companies and pension funds in going into long-term infrastructure investing and long-term investment projects that have a real purpose, SME credit. And that's where I think some of the recalibration, it's not asking for a massive rewrite of these regulations, but I think a tweaking of some of these re-regulation in areas which are most detrimental to long-term investment in Europe, which still very much is public sector investment, is needed to continue to see investments in European infrastructure and sub-sovereign investments in general. If you don't get that, it'll continue to be so unattractive for pension funds, insurance companies, and banks to do that, that you're basically undermining one of the key drivers of European investments that facilitates the jump over, and that is the infrastructure and sub-sovereign investments that basically have positive spillover effects. I think that's where the regulation probably hasn't looked at the impact that has happened in a sufficiently adequate manner. It's no problem to revisit the regulation if it has unintended consequences. I think the general intended consequences are fine, but this is one unintended consequence, and I'm sure I'm seeing Jacques Delavoisier sit here. It's a topic dear to your heart, and you'll probably talk about it on the next panel.
Thanks so much. Thank you very much to all the wonderful panelists. Thank you to you for your attention.